So first, I want to thank RITM for this opportunity to briefly introduce myself. I'm Brett Voyles. I'm currently a second-year history PhD student studying modern Latin America. With RITM support, I spent the month of July working in 2 archives in Bogota, Colombia, with the intended purpose of finding a path forward in a research question that has seemed increasingly difficult and politically complicated in the past year, which is a project on Chavez's Bolivarian Revolution. Initially, I went to Bogota to see what sources I could find on a project about Chavismo in Colombia. However, as I spent time in various collections of different archives, speaking with professors and librarians, I identified a new set of questions and kind of thinking about this evolving, tense, and ever-changing relationship between Colombia and Venezuela throughout the course of the Cold War up through the present. I don't have a definite set of questions yet, but I wanted to take this opportunity to walk you through a set of sources to kind of think about how I've rethought about my periodization and Colombia's role in my project. So the first picture on the left is from a collection of Francisco Urrutia Holguin, who is an important mid-20th century Colombian lawyer and diplomat. The map was attached to a document titled New Interpretations of the Monroe Doctrine, which detailed his reflections on a series of internationally adjudicated disputes, including this one regarding Colombia and Venezuela's border. I don't necessarily see my project starting in 1936, but this map demonstrated the persistent interrelation between Colombia and Venezuela even before the political violence and ongoing crises of the century later on. As I continued my research, I started looking and thinking about sources from political organizations on the left, especially during the armed conflict in Colombia, which could provide interesting insights. Specifically, how did the left view and engage with the conflict and mass migration of Colombians out of the country to the US, Spain, and Venezuela? The image in the middle is from a leftist political magazine called Alternativa, which was founded by important figures like Gabriel Garcia Marquez and Fals Borda. The images on the right are much more contemporary. The newspaper title is from 2006, and the image below is from 2002, showing Chavez shooting darts at the map of Colombia. And these two images kind of undergirded my initial inclination that there might be interesting material on the impact of Chavismo in Colombia. But spending time with these really helped me reorient my perspective and think critically about the longer history of Colombia's preceding decades of mass outmigration to Venezuela, which might inform the fear projected by the press in the 2 clippings here. So to conclude this brief overview, the history of Chavismo in Colombia is much too shallow a conceit. There is a deeper, longer, more complicated, intense relationship between these 2 states, not just based on border lines and oil rights, but also the movement of people across what was called Gran Colombia. That's it. Questions? Yeah.
How important will oil be to your project?
I don't know. Right now I'm thinking a lot more about like migration flows. Like the biggest thing I like kind of experienced during my time in Bogota was like taxi drivers were really telling on themselves, being like, I can't believe there's so many Venezuelans here. And like, this is like, right. Like there was like this very much like visceral kind of reaction to like the present moment. But up until about like 2015, Colombia was like the mass exporter of people on the continent. So thinking about kind of that relationship between Colombia having this history of migration, and now we think of Venezuela as being that kind of original, or like that being like the bulk of it now, is kind of where I'm sitting. Oil will be in there somewhere. Yeah. Okay.
On that note, how important would religion play in? Because I know in quarter of Latin America you have like Christian liberation theology kind of emerging as well. Do they kind of share the same perspectives?
I think it will depend on how like Cold War I go, and how much of like the armed conflict I talk about in Colombia, right? And thinking about like the armed left, because the armed left obviously like overlaps with liberation theology, and kind of like 1968 was like a moment in Colombia where liberation theology emerged. So unclear, but it'll be in there somewhere. It always has to be. Okay, good. Yes.